President Trump celebrated after the Supreme Court's decision. Here's that moment.
When did it come out? Just now?
No, it came out this morning, but basically very much narrows the Voting Rights Act.
Was it considered a win for who?
A win for Republicans.
I love it.
CNN's chief data analyst Harry Enten running the numbers on this one. Harry, let's kind of baseline it for everyone right now. How is the president doing right now with African-American voters, with black voters now versus this point in the first term?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing right now in the numbers is President Trump and the Republican Party are chipping away at the long-term advantage that Democrats have had with black voters, with African-Americans. You can see it right here. Look, Trump's approval among African-Americans at this point in term one, he was at 12%. You know, he's been losing ground with a lot of groups. He's gaining ground with African Americans. He's up to 16% at this point. And you say, this isn't that big of a shift. But I will tell you, Republicans absolutely love this shift that's going on because Democrats have had such a long-term advantage. The fact that he's actually gaining ground versus where he was in term number one, this has major implications for elections down the line because Democrats, especially in a lot of these tight races, you talk about places like Georgia, right down in the South, you see this type of movement for Trump actually gaining ground. This could have major ramifications and help put Republicans over the top in a number of southern places in the midterm elections.
But do you see this as part of a bigger trend?
I see this as absolutely part of a bigger trend. Donald Trump's Republican Party is absolutely gaining ground, not just him gaining in terms of his approval rating, but look at the party ID margin, Kate, because this to me was absolutely stunning. Look at this party ID margin among African Americans. At this point in Trump term number one, Democrats had a 63-point advantage. That is absolutely fallen. Look at where it is now. A double-digit shift away. Democrats, of course, still have the advantage, but it's a 12-point shift to the Republican Party. And I look back through Gallup's records. They sent me their records. And this, in fact, lead that Democrats have is actually smaller than any lead from 2006 to 2021. So Democrats are leading. But again, we're talking about chipping away. Republicans are chipping away at this long-term advantage that Democrats have had among African Americans. We see it in terms of Trump's approval rating, and we even see it to a wider degree among the party ID margin, where all of a sudden there are a number of African Americans who are walking away from the Democratic Party and a number of them who are walking into the Republican tent.
That is very interesting looking at that past Gallup information.
Yeah.
What does this mean for the race for control in Congress?
Okay, so you see this right here. You see this 51-point advantage that Democrats have, significantly less than you see that 63-point advantage. And what we will note was back in 2024, right, Donald Trump put in a historically strong performance among African Americans. Democrats performed the worst in a generation. Have they gained any of that coalition back from where they fell down to in 2024? But take a look here. Okay. Choice for election among African Americans. Kamala Harris was leading amongst that group in the pre-election polling by 63 points. Are Democrats gaining back any of that ground? It's a 62-point advantage now. Republicans are holding on to the gains that they made among African Americans in 2024. Republicans are gaining among African Americans. They are chipping away at that long-term advantage. The Donald Trump-led Republican Party is making gains among African Americans that we simply put have not seen the Republican Party make in a generation.
Fascinating. Good to see you here. Thanks so much for putting it together.
6 justices all but threw away the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Now, they left the words on the paper, but they erased the meaning. The way poll taxes and literacy tests and jelly bean counting tried to negate the 15th Amendment that gave black people the right to vote. Why? Because voting is the single most important power in a democracy. Not just the act of going to the polls and filling in some bubbles. No, it's the ability to vote for your candidate of choice. Now, you are not entitled to vote for the winner. But gerrymandering districts can mean that your power is so watered down that you never even had a chance to choose who represents you or pretends to. Enter Louisiana. The court struck down its map today, saying that lawmakers illegally used race to draw a majority black district. At the heart of the ruling was Section 2 of the Civil Rights Act that LBJ signed. And before I explain Section 2, why don't you listen to what LBJ said when he signed it into law?
Millions of Americans are denied the right to vote because of their color. This law will ensure them the right to vote. The wrong is one which no American in his heart can justify.
Ensure them the right to vote. Section 2, it tried to prevent racial gerrymandering precisely because it diluted voting power. And that's now all but out the window. And already today, we saw Republican candidates across Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi and Tennessee and South Carolina and others all push for the maps to be redrawn to benefit their party.
When did it come out? Just now?
No, it came out this morning, but basically very much narrows the Voting Rights Act.
Was it considered a win for
a
who?
win for Republicans?
I love it.
Do you? Because I worked in the voting rights section of the Civil Rights Division. So I can tell you how instrumental Section 2 was to getting gerrymandered districts redrawn to be fair, or prevent the maps from even getting drawn in the first place. It was critical to ensuring that voting rights meant anything to minority voters. Now, it wasn't a cakewalk, but before today, you had a fighting chance to ensure that the blood, the sweat, the tears, and the indignities and the violence towards those who had the audacity to believe in equality didn't fight and legislate in vain. It understood that racism, it could be right in your face, but it could also be strategic and covert. So you could prove that a district was unconstitutionally gerrymandered even if you couldn't show some smoking gun that said, you know why I'm drawing this crazy salamander or goofy shaped district? To make sure that black and brown voters can't gain strength in numbers. Who's writing that? Now, if you could show that the map had that effect, without those words, the map could be redrawn. But now the Supreme Court says, yeah, you have to bring that smoking gun. It's not enough to show that black voters were targeted or that black voters feel the brunt of an illegal practice. No, now you got to eliminate the possibility, no matter how remote and in the category of pigs flying, that these black voters were targeted because they were black Democrats. You likely have to prove that race, not political party, explains the harmful effect. Welcome to the wink and the nod portion of what MLK and so many others fighting for civil rights had to contend with. It's also an extremely high bar that will likely be insurmountable in most cases to prove that. And the why. Why the majority did this is something you ought to pay close attention to. Because they said that there had been vast social change, that's the phrase, particularly in the South, that have made these considerations unnecessary. Are we back on the flawed theory that we live in a post-racial world? Wow. Tell that to my mother, who was 13 years old when the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. Or tell it to my 13-year-old son, who just saw it become what Justice Elena Kagan called a dead letter. My first guest is a longtime champion of the Civil Rights Act and has not left the fight. Former Attorney General under President Obama, Eric Holder, joins me now. And I should note, I served as a career prosecutor during his tenure in the Civil Rights Division. Attorney General, thank you so much for being here. As you can imagine, this feels deeply personal to so many people and legally and analytically completely unhinged, frankly, to me. But I have to ask you what your takeaway is, because there are those who will look at this and say, see, gerrymandering is bad, even if it's meant to undo entrenched racial discrimination. What's your thought?
Well, I got to tell you, I take this both personally and professionally. I was 13 years old when the 65 Voting Rights Act was passed. I was the Attorney General who had to deal with that first attack on the Voting Rights Act, the Shelby County case that has, unfortunately, my name attached to it. And I've seen the dismemberment of the Voting Rights Act by the Roberts Court. And you have to ask yourself, why? John Roberts, when he was a young lawyer at the Justice Department, apparently was against the Voting Rights Act, and now that he is the Chief Justice of the United States, he has finally reached that dream of his to really come up with a way in which you get rid of the most important parts of the Voting Rights Act. So I feel as personally as well as professionally, and it's something that I think we have to fight, and we have to do all that we can to try to manage this crisis that we are presently in, but then come up with long-term solutions so that we put this country back on the right path.
Are you persuaded by Justice Alito's statements that the country has seen vast social change, particularly in the South, as a reason, and what he wrote was, Black voters now participate in elections at similar rates as the rest of the country? Is that persuasive enough to gut Section 2?
No. I mean, the reason that Black people participate at essentially the same rate, to the extent that that's true, is because of the protections that you saw in the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Before that act was passed, you did not see significant Black voter participation. It was difficult to register. It was difficult to vote. 65 Voting Rights Act goes into effect. You see a stark number of people, greater number of people who register, who vote, who ultimately get elected. So, you know, and this notion that somehow or another, just because the nation has changed, and it has changed, we have to acknowledge that, because if we don't, we do a grave disservice to those who sacrificed to give me opportunities that they did not have. But the nation is not yet at the place where it should be. Their race is still a factor. If you look at economic factors, maternal death rates, any number of things, wealth, education, Black folks, Hispanic folks are still not doing nearly as well as their white fellow citizens. Race is still a factor in this nation. And
of course, the Supreme Court has described partisan voting and gerrymandering as distinct from race-based because of Section 2 and when it actually had teeth. I mean, there's also been this debate that's gone on, Attorney General, that for years, people have debated whether to expand the Supreme Court. Obviously, at a time like this, in this 6-3 decision along ideological lines, people are very angry about the ability to have 6 people determine and unravel 6 decades worth of progress. Do you think that part of the conversation moving forward should involve the composition or the numbers in the Supreme Court?
I think that should be a part of the conversation. And I think we also have to realize when people say, well, you're just trying to pack the court. Well, the court is already packed. Merrick Garland never got a hearing, and so he never had an opportunity to become a justice on the Supreme Court. If rules had been followed as they normally had been, he would have been on the court. And the rule was, well, he was too close. It was too close to an election for him to get a hearing or even an interview. Well, then Amy Coney Barrett comes along later on and is confirmed while people are in the process of voting. So those are 2 seats that probably should be seats appointed by a Democratic president. So the criticism that in considering expanding the court is packing the court, and that's something negative, is again something that Republicans will criticize, the very thing that they themselves did. But I think that has to be a part of the conversation.